Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we'll be breaking down some of your start-sit questions to go along with some top DFS picks. Be sure to check out our Wednesday show for a full game-by-game breakdown of the Week 2 slate from myself and PFF's own Dwayne McFarland. We've been loading up on PFF dudes as guests lately, and they're all smart guys. I hope the shows have been fine, but today we have a very special visitor that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Now, I've gone, to far lengths to get this intro ready. I've, swept everything I could find, but we have the connoisseur of context, the fake football meteorologist of sharp football analysis, the Swami of Konami, Rich Hribar, a.k.a. @LordReeves on Twitter. Rich, how's it going, man?
Ian, man, what is going on? It's always great to, see that the Ohio branch of fantasy football, analyst Twitter has grown and gone to great lengths. And, I don't know if have you moved to Cincinnati? Are you planning on it?
I'm in Columbus for the time being. We'll see what the future holds. But yeah, man, Ohio against the world, always and forever.
Yeah, absolutely. Rumor has it, I don't know if I'm allowed to spoil this, but rumor has it as Ohio is going to be a spot that's going to host one of the Scott Fishbowl live drafts next year.
Ooh, as it should be. Why not? Let's bring it on. The more Midwest, the better. As we like to say, our two mottos in Ohio are, it's a nice, affordable place to live, and also we are better than Detroit. So with that said, I want to direct people to the PFF Fantasy Twitter page @PFF_fantasy. Every Tuesday, we send out a message asking for your toughest start-sit questions. I go through them at some point Tuesday night, and here we are Wednesday ready to answer them. So apologies if I didn't get to pick yours. Was trying to touch on certain players, get some tough conversations going. So without further ado, we're going to dive right into some start-sit questions, Rich. All right, Malcolm Brown versus Devin Singletary from @ORain.
Do we know, are these PPR leagues? We're just assuming?
Yeah, let's assume PPR.
All right. Yeah. It's interesting, conversation of the whole Rams backfield and even the Bills to an extent too. I think if I'm going start-sit, just like in general, who I want to play, Malcolm Brown gets the kind of touches I want. If you look at him, he played 16 third downs in week 1. Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson only played 1. He got all the goal line touches and he got all the favorable touches. Cam Akers faced 8 or more men in the box on 43% of his carries. Malcolm Brown just 17%. Now the matchup is definitely not as good, against the Eagles. They've been a team we've kind of avoided on the ground. So I don't think we're going to just smash Malcolm Brown in as like a set RB2 moving forward. But I think that he gets kind of touches we want to pursue for fantasy. Devin Singletary's got a good matchup, but we saw already in week 1, he's conceding goal line work to Zach Moss. Wasn't in on any of the goal lines. He was in on the Josh Allen run. Obviously, Zach Moss caught a touchdown. He's kind of get those, I call them purgatory backs. Like he just gets the kind of touches, like he can have 15 for 75 and look amazing, but you're not getting over the hurdle with him. So Malcolm Brown can have a bad game and score a touchdown. So I'll chase the favorable touches over the probably more efficient touches that Singletary will get.
Yeah, I'm with you. The range of outcomes for Brown is definitely, I think, higher if things go his way. But, I would caution people. I don't think we're looking at a locked-in weekly RB2 just yet. This quote after the game from Sean McVay really pointed me towards that. And this was McVay's words. Last night it was Malcolm's night, and I thought he delivered in a big way. It might be the same next week in Philly. It might be different. I think each week we'll kind of present different approaches, but we feel good about 3 running backs. Good to get Darrell in there for a couple carries as well. Even though he was a little bit more limited, I think as he continues to get healthy, we feel really good about all 3 of those backs. Now, I mocked him saying this throughout the offseason, but to his credit, it really did appear to be a hot hand system in week 1 at least, and Brown was the best back, so he kept going. So, perfectly capable that he could do that again. But, I've as my RB27 this week. I get moving up a little bit more, but again, just wouldn't assume top 20 production on a weekly basis in this fluid backfield. All right, again, assuming PPR here, this one's from @Dayton Hintz, maybe another Ohio boy, who knows. Joe Mixon versus Austin Eckler.
I still do have Mixon a couple spots higher than Eckler, even if we're assuming PPR, because, obviously now the talk of week 1 was just will Austin Eckler catch passes after being targeted just once. But I'm more concerned. I know he's going to get involved in the pass game to some degree. I'm more concerned that, Josh Kelly got that only carry inside the 5. He had 3 of the 4 carries inside the 10. That's what I'm more worried about a little bit. We want touchdowns. We want touchdown production. Mixon still has that. He was nondescript week 1, and that offensive line was outmatched by the Charger offensive line, but he still had 20 touches. He had 80% of the backfield touches. He's got a really good history against the Browns. In 6 career games against Cleveland, he's averaged 135 yards from scrimmage. In 2 games last year, he had 176 yards and 186 yards with the touchdowns. So, I mean, I've still got him a couple spots higher. I'm willing to still go to bat for Joe Mixon. I hope we don't have to wait 9 weeks like we did last year for this to finally take off. I still have Eckler as a top 15 guy, too, because I think the matchup is really good. Especially when you look at the Chiefs, they allowed the ghost of David Johnson to kind of come back and reignite everyone's flames for him in week 1. I think that the Chargers will run the ball effectively. It just depends on how they can stay in game script. But I do have Mixon just a couple spots higher.
Yeah, I'm with you. I got Mixon RB10 this week, Eckler RB13. So it's definitely close. And, it's funny mixing on because every week, I put together is taking stock of all the backfields article. And, everyone's always surprised that Giovanni Bernard just consistently carves out these, 30, 40% snap rolls with a handful of targets. Because Mixon is one of these guys where if he got those targets, he has a skill set for it. He could be a legit top 5 fantasy back. Unfortunately, in this role, I think his, ceiling's more in that 8 to 10 range, but that's fine. 20 plus carries and, a couple targets per game. We'll live with that. It does seem like that might be, Austin Eckler's role more weeks than not. Career high 19 carries and stellar 69% snap rate in week 1. Just think Mixon's touch floor is a little bit higher. And you said it is a really good matchup here against Kansas City. But I think what we're going to need from Eckler, he's going to get more than one target for sure. But let's see some more design stuff because we know Tyrod's not a fan of checking down. So, put Eckler out there at wide receiver. Get these. God, they did it last year with Andre Patton. Now we got another dude just sitting out there at wide receiver 3, not doing anything. Put Eckler out there. Defense will pay attention to him. All right, moving on to some wide receivers here. This is from @TribleGween. Tyler Lockett versus AJ Brown. All right, we got Tyler Lockett versus AJ Brown. Who you got?
Oh, man, this is a tough one to me because I don't want to run a news with AJ Brown. Like, he had 8 targets last week. It was tied for the team lead. The bad news is, his 8 out was just 6.9 yards, which when it was 14 yards last year. And then when you go back to his past 4 games, dating back to last season, 10 total catches. And he's actually been out targeted by Corey Davis over that span. But Lockett runs into kind of that spot that we've avoided, that Patriots secondary, the guys that have just kind of limited everybody. Man, this is a tough one for me. I do have Brown just a little bit higher because I think the touchdown upside's a little bit higher, but I wouldn't fault anyone for playing for a safe floor with Lockett. He still ran 68% of his routes in the slot. He's not going to Stephon Gilmore. All those guys are good in that secondary. I think if you're going for just the floor and you want a solid game in a PPR sense, I think Lockett's your guy. I think AJ Brown is a much higher ceiling this week, though.
Yeah, tough matchup and just tough overall spot for Lockett. I think some people are looking at the Seahawks-Patriots game expecting a shootout, but we're looking at, after week 1, the 32nd and 27th ranked teams and situation-neutral pace. So 2 pretty good defenses on both sides of the ball, 2 great secondaries, really. So going to be tough for Lockett. I'm also team A.J. Brown. If you had told me 2 weeks ago A.J. Brown's going to get 8 targets in week 1, I'd feel pretty fantastic about that. I know, he only turned in 5 catches for 39 yards, but, Tannehill puts that fade at the end of the game a little bit more on the money. I think we're kind of talking in a different tone about A.J. Brown. So, okay, Corey Davis is going to be there, but hey, if Tannehill is going to start throwing the ball potentially 40 times a week, wouldn't be the wildest thing if A.J. Brown and Corey Davis can present some sort of weekly value. But between Lockett and A.J., good problem to have, but yeah, I'm also going A.J. All right, from Connor Wren, Stephon Diggs versus Mike Evans. Now, I saw something before the show started. I believe if it changed your opinion, John Brown missed practice with an injury.
Yeah, definitely something to monitor. I still like it. Kind of like the same. It's almost like the same layout that we just talked about, with AJ Brown. It's Mike Evans coming into the week. We kind of didn't expect anything from Mike Evans. Then he played. I actually think if you own Mike Evans, you should feel kind of positive because he played 93% of snaps and looked healthy. Granted, he was completely erased once again by Marshawn Lattimore. But he's going to be in a good spot bouncing back. Against the Carolina defense that we're going to target with everybody weekly going forward. It's the youngest defense in the NFL. Stephon Diggs looked great. If you would have told me the Bills, both Stephon Diggs and John Brown, would have led the NFL in routes run in week 1, I would have laughed at you, especially being huge favorites, but they did. And he looked good. He caught 8-9 targets, had good rapport. a little stickier matchup though this week than he had against the Jets. Xavier Howard and Byron Jones on the outside. Those guys only combined to allow 3 catches last week, and granted it was the Patriots boundary receiver. So Diggs is going to meet them a little bit in the middle there. But I still think I want to go back to Evans here. I mean, I think we're getting a lot of stylistic play questions, and I like chasing guys that have touchdown potential. Those are guys I like to roster. And I like Stephon Diggs a lot, but I think Mike Evans still has a higher ceiling, in his range of outcomes here than Stephon Diggs does in this matchup.
It just seems like everything's setting up for this to be a boom week for Evans. As you said, I mean, his snap rate was up there last week. So even if the hamstring injury has him at less than 100%, his snaps are right there where they normally would be. And I mean, over these past few years with the Panthers, they used to have James Bradbury as number 1 corner, one of the toughest wide receiver cornerback matchups every single year, because he has to go against, Michael Thomas, Julio, and Mike Evans 6 total times per season. So he wasn't one of these guys that was shutting down these dudes. But Bradbury is one of the league's bigger number 1 cornerbacks. He at least did a good job of making life tough on Mike Evans. Now, man, they don't have anyone over 6 foot or over 200 pounds. I just think he's going to body these guys. And it's just we already have, a squeaky wheel spot in week 2. We got Bruce Arians saying he feels bad if Evans gets less than 10 targets. So kind of lost in that disappointing, TB12 debut. His deep ball looked pretty good, man. I mean, the arm strength hasn't gone anywhere from Brady. I think the best is still to come from this Buccaneers offense and team as a whole. I mean, no shame in losing on the road in week 1 to the Saints, who are, in my opinion, the favorites to win the NFC as a whole. All right, this one is from Bossman at PFF George himself. Robert Woods versus Will Fuller.
Oh, this is one of those ones where you want to say, like, we had a bunch of floor versus ceiling questions, but I actually think this one is just open and shut, kind of Robert Woods, just because I think the floor and ceiling both kind of lie with him. I know that sounds crazy to say that the Will Fuller doesn't have a high ceiling, but since the Ravens have acquired Marcus Peters, they haven't allowed any receiver to reach 100 receiving yards. They've allowed just 2 wide receiver 1 scoring weeks since that span, and they are number 1 in completion rate on balls thrown 15 yards or further downfield. Now, Fuller showed us on Thursday in that opener that they're going to use him a little more near the line of scrimmage. He's going to get some more padding targets. But I don't think that this is a spot where it's inducive for a high ceiling. I'm kind of down on Deshaun Watson this week as well. When you look, especially at his low scoring game against the Ravens in his career last year when these 2 teams played, where Woods, kind of picked up right where he left off. 6 of 8 targets he caught for 105 yards. He's actually going to be going against his, old teammates, Nick Roby Coleman and then Darius Slay, which isn't a great matchup, but I just think that the way they scheme him and get him targets gives him a really bankable floor. And he has been just outplaying Cooper Kupp now going back for like the last 9 weeks in the last season. So I'm still high on Robert Woods.
Yeah, I would like to see George's entire lineup, because I don't know why we need to bench either of these guys. I mean, in my opinion, two top 15 receivers this week. The interesting thing with the Rams, man, so they had their week 9 bye last season. Then we actually saw them go from being the most frequent offense in 3 wide receiver sets to going straying away from that, using a little bit more Johnny Munt, 2 tight end stuff. And it's really helped Woods. I mean, since that bye, Woods has only played 8 games and Cubs had 9 games, but Woods has had 35 additional targets along with the rushing floor, man. They are just feeding him. And I think Kupp's going to be okay, because the problems he had last year, like he was getting taken off the field in 2 wide receiver sets, they've righted those wrongs. He was there in week 1. So I think Kupp could actually have a nice little bounce back week. But yeah, I just think Woods, the floor is too high. And I mean, we talk about high floor guys, like high floor guys have high ceilings as well, because all it takes is, one of those catches to get in the end zone. And God, man, if there's one guy in this league that could use some touchdown regression at some point, it's Bobby Trees. So, all right, this next one is from at Will 352-04-516, sick handle, man. Robby Anderson versus Russell Gage versus John Brown. I guess with John Brown hurt, we can kind of throw him out. So let's just go with Robby Anderson versus Russell Gage.
Yeah, I mean, I think here I'm still looking at Robby Anderson. The way the Carolina offense functioned the first week, it was very similar to what we had kind of from like the Arizona Cardinals offense all year ago. I mean, they targeted their wide receivers at a league high rate. Just under 80% of the targets went to wide receivers. All of those guys got 8 or more targets, Curtis Samuel and DJ Moore, along with Robbie A. Now, Robbie A did get the splash play that kind of inflated his line a little bit. But I think that we're going to see just them throw a lot, throughout the course of the season. Like there's going to be a lot of weeks where all those guys are flirting with 7+ targets. Where Russell Gage, I think, is a fine floor play, but I think that he and Hayden Hurst are going to oscillate a little bit, and we're going to talk about Hayden Hurst a little bit later, who was just erased by Jamal Adams in that game in week 1, where it kind of shifted to where Russell Gage got those targets, and he was, did a lot of fourth quarter work as well. Russell Gage, I think Russell Gage is a fine guy to have like for your like bye week glue guy, injury guy, but he's not like a guy I don't think we're going to expect him to catch 9 for 114 every week going forward. So I mean, I'll side with Robby A still here and play for that boom mentality.
It was interesting to see how they use Robby as well, because I don't know if he's going to get 8 targets every week, but they weren't all these like downfield shots. He did convert the one, but they were actually using a more short intermediate. So I think when McCaffrey gets more than 4 targets, maybe it's Robby who sees some of those go away. But for now, yeah, take him over Gage. I do like Gage as a waiver pickup because, as you said, he's fine for bye week fill-ins. I mean, if we're going to have a complimentary receiver, it might as well be one in an offense throwing the ball as much as the Falcons. And, since they traded Sanu last season, he's been getting the targets. And I think it was ESPN's Mike Clay who kind of pointed this out originally, at least the first guy I saw pointed out. But this Falcons offense, man, is like one injury away at almost any position from being in a lot of trouble. But in Gage's case, if Ridley or Julio misses any time, we're looking at 8 to 10 targets per week. So not a bad guy to have in the holster by any stretch. All right, from at HBTC23, Paris Campbell versus CeeDee Lamb.
Man, I saw this one. This one is
a good one.
I mean, he picked up some good bench guys later in the draft, obviously, because obviously, we got this Blake Jarwin injury now too, which helps CeeDee Lamb. Paris Campbell's in such a great spot though too. If everyone that watched that Viking secondary play last week, I mean, how could you not be just wanting to chomp at the bit to play anybody that plays them? And then CeeDee Lamb plays the Falcons. If you watch that game, it's like, oh my goodness, all those boundary corners gave up so much production. Now, I was a little bit disappointed that the Cowboys basically used CeeDee Lamb as a strict slot player. I was one of those people that was looking forward to seeing if they were going to start using Amari Cooper in a more effective fashion. And Cooper was fine in week 1, but his splits versus the slot and playing on the boundary are so night and day that I thought that they would scheme Cooper a little bit more. Maybe it will over the course of the season as Lamb gets comfortable. But he was locked in. I mean, he ran 93% of his routes in the slot in week 1. I mean, that's where he will get the kind of the, I guess, better matchup in air quotes against the Falcons cornerbacks. But you're not scared of Darqueze Dennard really either. I still think here I would probably go with Campbell. Man, it's tough. I have these guys really close in rankings too. I have Campbell just a couple spots higher. I mean, he just had that. He almost had like an instant mind meld with Phil. Those anticipatory throws from the slot. They were really clicking in the week 1, and then he just runs into this Minnesota matchup, and all 3 of those guys played so poorly in that secondary in week 1. And you're talking about guys like Alan Lazard and Marcus Valdes-Scantling getting over on them too. It wasn't just Devontae Adams. Man, it's tough. I got Campbell just a couple spots higher, and if Lamb outscored, I wouldn't be surprised. So maybe this would be one we disagree on.
Yeah, I would go with CeeDee here. It's close. I'm 1 week away from trusting Campbell as a potential every week starter. I'm just not convinced that Phillip Rivers was brought to the Colts to throw the ball 40 plus times a game. It's how it worked in week 1, and credit to the Jaguars for getting the job done. But this offense, it has to go through the offensive line at some point. I mean, I understand Rivers is more competent than Jacoby Brissett, getting the balls to the backs and just taking whatever the defense is giving them. But you're not going to win many. I mean, we saw what happened when they try to have Rivers throw the ball that much. Not good things on the scoreboard. So, I am expecting a drop back in the volume. I'd like to see, where Campbell kind of falls in that target range when we see a game with fewer than 46. So I will go CeeDee. I think this Cowboys-Falcons game just screams shootout from all areas. So I will take the slightly higher scoring game. Interesting note on the game-by-game breakdown pod we had go up this morning from Dwayne McFarland, where with CeeDee running those routes in the slots, I mean, I think he said 40% of his routes he was covered by linebackers and safeties. I mean, it's hysterical how it's 2020 and the NFL still just, can't fathom how to guard these top wide receivers in the slot. It's like, put a linebacker on him, wherever he lines up, it'll happen. But, it's a reality, and he is going to have those good matchups throughout the season.
Yeah, that's one of those things, not to cut you off as we're rolling through here, but that's one of those things that, like, when people look at the cornerback matchup charts, and a lot of people come to your site to do that, like, people think that just because there's a slot cornerback that he guards the slot receiver. But that's not really the case. We're talking a lot of zone coverage is played when those guys are in slot coverage. It's not like they're just lining 3 cornerbacks up to face 3 wide receivers every snap. And sometimes they can lead you away. Guys that play in the slot get a lot of that work against linebacker stuff because you're talking about working through those zones on those drags and those slants. And, it's not always against those cornerbacks that are awesome and pop there. So, I mean, yeah, that's how those guys get those favorable targets. But you always have to run from teams that have great slot cornerbacks because typically they're not just shadowing guys like slot versus slot receiver.
Real good point. Yeah, we almost never see the shadow matchups in the slot at all. And I think we all remember that one Keenan Allen game late season a couple years ago against the Steelers when they literally guarded him with a linebacker on like 80% of the snaps. So always got that in the range of outcomes too. Gotta love the NFL. All right, this one's from @Shady24. Darius Slayton, 2 touchdown week 1 versus week 1 world beater Sammy Watkins.
Yeah, both these guys almost have like a chasing points feel, don't they?
Yeah.
A little bit because, Golden Tate was out. And Slayton's been awesome anytime a Giants player has been out of the lineup. Maybe that won't be the case here. Maybe this is truly him making that year 2 leap. But he's literally been awesome anytime that, either whether Sterling Shepard's been out or Golden Tate's been out or Evan Ingram's been out, like he's been involved. And last week Golden Tate was out and then you fire up Darius Slayton and he looked really good. It wasn't just him running, deep routes and getting deep targets. He looked like a really bona fide receiver that took a step forward. Now the question is just if Tate plays this weekend, what do you do? Because, they're on the road in Chicago. Daniel Jones didn't play well there last year. So there's definitely low floor and variance there, whereas you can just say, hey, we got 2 high variance players. I'm just going to play the one attached to Patrick Mahomes. Right. That's kind of where we are with the Lizard King. He has not had a good history against the Chargers, and the Chargers are a team that has limited, wide receiver production, even Tyreek Hill. They've actually been pretty favorable against Mahomes in a Mahomesian sense. Mahomes only thrown for 256 or fewer in all 4 of his career games against the Chargers, and last year he threw for under 2 bills in both. Which is kind of, not Mahomesian. But, I think it just comes down to saying if Tate plays, I'm going to just play the guy next to Mahomes. If Tate is out, I would have no problem going back to Slayton.
Yeah, the Tate factor is wild. It impacts Sterling Shepard too. And if you look at yards per route run, the slot versus out wide, Shepard actually is one of the more sensitive receivers too. That he's much better in the slot. And with Tate out, he is in there in the slot. So I kind of like DFS, going to Shepard as potential, getting bounce back. Because all throughout training camp, everyone was pointing to Shepard as a, likely number 1 wide receiver. So, fair play to Slayton having that big week 1 against a tough secondary. But I do think it's still, I would call him, the ingrained permanent number 1 option by any stretch. So I have Slayton ranked higher than Watkins, but then I was looking at this question and I still wanted to pick Watkins. So I might need to readdress the rankings after this podcast, but it's just one of those things, man. Look, one of my worst calls last season was not getting on the Brashad Perryman hype train at the end of the year because it was just Brashad Perryman. That was the extent of my analysis. Like, how are we going to trust Brashad Perryman? Who cares about the targets? And I feel like this is the same situation with Sammy where, just don't want to trust him because Sammy Watkins has been burned too many times. But you know what? The guy's out there in Chiefs offense with a full-time starting role, seemingly set up for, anywhere from 8 to 10, 6 to 10, I'd say, targets per game. So, yeah, man, it's probably Sammy. Feels weird to say, but I guess we got to go back to the well here. Wow. Here we are, man. Sammy Watkins 2020. All right, we're going to have some tight ends now. It's from AccuCoy71. Jonnu Smith versus Dallas Goedert.
Yeah, a lot of people have seen that Goddard game because he was drafted as a tight end too. A lot of people just took a shot hoping that maybe Ertz will miss some time, something happens. But you've seen it even with Ertz playing. He popped once again. He's got 8 or more targets now going back his last 4 games back to last year. Ertz was banged up in 2 of those, but he's the focal point of the offense. That team runs 2 tight ends. They also had a terrible game plan in week 1. For Carson Wentz to lead the league in ADOT when you have all those offensive line injuries is just unreal. And he's taking 8 sacks. Like the fact that they weren't getting the ball to the running backs out more and getting the ball out fast, like that was just unreal. I'm surprised Carson Wentz survived week 1 with a beating that he took. But Goddard it goes back. They're involving him even more back to last year, and it takes off. The thing that stinks is just how sticky is it? Like, how sticky is this? How can we count on it? Because they have Zach Ertz. It just because one of those things that it's hard to really get over that hurdle in my mind. It's like, all right, well, Goddard had 8 for 101, but there aren't going to be a lot of games where Zach Ertz has 3 for 17, right? Like, yeah. So when does that swing back? And then Jonnu too. Jonnu, you look at the matchup that they had last week, and you say, yeah. he got the touchdown, but only had 36 yards. And Ryan Tannehill dropped back the most he's ever dropped back with the Titans, and now they're a 10-point favorite at home. So do we go back to Jonnu Smith just blocking, for 60% of his snaps in week 2? So it's one of those things. I think when I look at the Eagles Rams game, I think that just has a little more potential to be high scoring, go back and forth. So I would potentially go with Goddard. And we didn't really get to see the Cowboys attack all the new pieces for the Rams with Jarwin's injury, losing Corey Littleton. And Kaiser, that was his first game played in 2 years at middle linebacker. And we really get to see the Cowboys even really kind of attack that because Jarwin, kind of went out. So maybe the Eagles will exploit that in week 2. I do have Goddard just a couple spots higher. I'm a little more – I have like 1 foot in, 1 foot out on Jonnu because the guy is so talented and he's so good after the catch. But this offense, even in week 1, you got that 1-yard touchdown, but 4 for 36 isn't going to cut it. I feel like he still has a lower floor too.
Yeah, Titans are the absolute. They get in by the goal line. It's like which backup offensive tackle or random tight end you never heard of is going to score this time. Doing Jonnu no favors. I'm also going with Goddard. It's close. I have these guys right next to each other in my tight end rankings, kind of on the tight end 1 borderline this week. But look, Goddard is a full-time player in this version of the Eagles offense. And even with Deshaun Jackson's snaps likely to go up, I don't think that's really going to change. We've now seen this for almost pretty much a half a season. You go back to since the Eagles week 10 bye in the 2019 season, where you mentioned that Hurst has been banged up a little bit and Goddard was banged up before that bye, but just in this last 8-9 games, Goddard has had 66 targets and Hurst has had 68, and Goddard's actually scored more points per reception. So I'm not sitting here saying we should be ranking Goddard over Hurst. I still think Hurst should be the favorite in any given week to lead this team in targets. But leading into our next question, it is interesting because even though Goddard is the quote unquote number 2 tight end on his team, he's actually playing a lot more than other tight ends around the league, including TJ Hawkinson, who's the next question. So Hawkinson versus Goddard. And what I was talking about there real quick is, last week, Hawkinson, 64% snaps, and Jesse James is right there at 50%. And it's annoying, Sheriff Jesse, okay, do your thing, man. I know they paid him $24 million over 3 years for whatever reason before they drafted Hawkinson. But, how do you approach this when Hawkinson is his team's tight end 1, Goddard's his team's tight end 2, but we actually might see more of Goddard when it comes time on the field?
Yeah, you talked about, Goddard, ran the 31, pass routes. Hawkinson only ran a pass route on 59.6% of Detroit dropbacks. He almost did have another touchdown. He had tackled at the 1-yard line on 1-2. He almost would have had 2, which would change probably the perception for a lot of people. But you talk about Goddard, I think, is a lot. You can count on his usage more than you can on Hawkinson, especially if Kenny Galladay is going to play. The one positive thing about Hawkinson is that in 9 games now played with Matthew Stafford, he has at least 1 end zone target in 6 of those 9 games. So he's kind of like a safe bet that at least you can chase a touchdown with him if you feel like you're in a pinch. But I do think with Galladay coming back and then his actual route per drop back rate in week 1, it still leaves some questions to be answered for him making a full bona fide jump into locked in tight end 1 status. I still think he's more in the hope you get a touchdown category.
Yeah, man, with Hawkinson, with Galladay out, I assumed Hawkinson would leap up in that top 3, but Quintez Cephas getting 10 targets, man. The 2 times I've just been at a loss for words with a week 1 production where I just literally didn't even know the guy's name was this year with Quintez Cephas and 2 years ago when Philip Lindsay did his thing in week 1. And I was just like, who? So, on me, I got to do a little better job in the offseason, I guess. But my goodness, man, I did not see that.
You're a Big Ten guy too, man. Where are you at?
I'm not trying to make excuses. I'll own up to my mistakes. It was a low point, but we'll watch the film and get better. All right. Moving on, at RemDog15, we got Russell Wilson versus Mr. 300-yard man, Josh Allen.
I'm going Josh Allen here without even blinking, to be honest. As good as Russ was, and we finally got to see him cook. This is just you're talking about the spot. You're talking about Russ is at home, but he's playing a Patriots team that really hasn't given up a lot of production dating back to last year. And they do have some pieces I still think that have opted out and that they lost in terms of pass rushers in Calvin and Jamie Collins that will maybe make an impact. They won't be as locked down as they were last year. But that Patriots defense still matches up pretty well with what Seattle could do. And then Josh Allen is just in a spot where, one, you should be just encouraged by how they used Josh Allen in week 1. He had a career-high 53 dropbacks. He used play action on a career-high dropbacks, 42%. He just used play action on 23% of his dropbacks. last season, and he had 8.5 yards per attempt using play action in week 1 as opposed to 5.5 without. So definitely keep using it, Bills. And then you talk about just the matchup. He's completely obliterated the Dolphins in his career, and the Dolphins have some new pieces on defense. And we can't always use these what a guy did versus a guy 4 years ago, whatever. But I mean, he's literally been the QB2, the QB1, the QB7, and the QB1 in 4 career games against the Dolphins. And the Dolphins just allowed 75 rushing yards to Cam Newton. So, I mean, it's really hard for me to get away from Josh Allen and not treat him as like a top 6, potentially top 5, quarterback option this week, where I think Russ is like, you'll probably still start him if you have him, but I think he's more like, should be treated as more of like a lower end QB1 this week.
Yeah, I'm really drinking the Kool-Aid, man. I got Josh sitting there number 3 in the QB ranks this week. And yeah, to me, this wasn't a conversation really. It wasn't, a hard debate in my head as well. I just like bringing up Josh Allen like in positive lights, because every time it goes out there on Twitter, like 5 people in the mentions are always just going, oh, someone from PFF said something nice about Josh Allen in this economy. Just, it's crazy, man. So yes, Josh Allen, say what you will about the guy as a real life quarterback, anyone's idea of a top 5 option this week in fantasy land. All right, 2 more quick start sets, then we're going to get on to our top DFS picks. So this is from @Sean the Richard. We need to sit one of Michael Gallup, Anthony Miller, or Diontae Johnson.
I think here I'm going Anthony Miller, just when you look at his usage, and I love Anthony Miller. I was high on him coming in, but I mean, it was a bummer that he really didn't play in 2 wide receiver sets. He actually was, an out snap by Ted Ginn. He ran a pass on just 55% of the Bears dropbacks, and really didn't get cooking until all the cornerbacks died for the Detroit Lions last week. So it gave me just a little bit of trepidation. And then actually Trubisky didn't even play well until all those guys went out too. So it just gives me a little bit of trepidation. I think Gallup's just in a smash spot against, when you like said, we talk about those boundary corners in Atlanta. We expect that game to pop. And then Diontae Johnson, I just think is a little bit safer floor with his 10 targets, in week 1. I do have some questions still about Diontae Johnson, just the way he was used compared to the how he was used last year and how it rolled over. Low ADOT, no vertical targets, no end zone target type of guy. I think that we still might be not seeing the full potential of how he could be used. But when you look at those other 2 guys, they're just more bankable for targets and to be on the field more than Anthony Miller, I think. But still hold on to Anthony Miller, see where this thing goes. But I think right now he's more of a flex wide receiver 4 for me this week.
Yeah, and we're recording this Wednesday early afternoon, so I know Allen Robinson has a press conference later, seemingly to announce a contract extension. So I know there was some hope that, hey, maybe A-Rob leaves, Miller just takes over the passing game. Whether or not that would even benefit him is another topic of conversation. But yeah, I don't think it's really all that close. I got Diontae and Gallup top 33 and Miller down at wide receiver 50. If you just look at the box score, okay, he had a good week 1, but as you brought up with the snaps, a lot of concern for him moving forward potentially. All right, last one here. We need to sit one. It's from @PapaGoose12. Sit one between Jonathan Taylor, Raheem Mostert, Joe Mixon, and Aaron Jones. Yeah,
great group he's got. It's I would be looking for a trade if you got a wide receiver hole or something. You take one of these guys. People are looking for backs. Definitely shop one of these guys around. I think just the short end of the stick here is Mostert. I mean, I definitely want to play Jonathan Taylor. I definitely want to play Aaron Jones, and I want to play Joe Mixon. So I mean, that's just where it kind of falls. I mean, plus we were really going to count on a 76-yard catch and run, from Mostert out of the backfield weekly. I do think Tevin Coleman will play more snaps now that the air quality won't be a concern. I think he'll get more snaps. Then I also am just concerned about this matchup. Well, one, the 49ers right side of the offensive line, right guard and center with Wes Richards still being out is a problem. They didn't run it effectively in week 1. And the Jets just devour the run. They were number 1 in rushing EPA last year. And then in week 1, they came out and just Josh Allen was the only person that had any successful runs against them. The backfield didn't do anything. So, I mean, Mostert's still giving me, that volume-based RB2 guy. He's in a system we like. But I supremely just like the other 3 guys a lot more here.
Yeah, that's how I feel. Top 15, to me, they're 4 top 15 running backs, and Mostert just comes in at the bottom there. So definitely, I was encouraged by his pass game usage, even though he's not going to get the 75-yard touchdown every week, like you said. It was good to see him at least splitting that, as opposed to McKinnon taking the whole damn thing over. So we'll see. It's interesting versus that Jets D. I thought losing Jamal Adams, they might just become an awful defense, but Greg Williams just wants to stop the run at all counts, so might want to be loading up on those passing games in the future. So, all right, now we're getting to our favorite DFS plays of the week. We'll kind of mention the player and whether or not we're thinking about him in a cash or tournament game format. So, Rich, how about you hit me with your quarterback first?
Yeah, my quarterback is Aaron Rodgers. I mean, man, he looked like old Aaron Rodgers, not the guy we've seen years, not the guy that we only see when he played the Raiders, a year ago. He looked like red ass Aaron Rodgers, and they were just ripping it up. And then you could say, all right, well, the Vikings had a lot of moving parts, and they had, introducing all these rookies in the secondary. Well, the matchup once again is phenomenal at home against the Lions team that they already were missing Jeffrey Okudah, the third pick overall in the draft, the hamstring injury. Desmond Trufant and Justin Coleman also both left week one with hamstring injuries, as we talked about with Mitch kind of getting hot in that fourth quarter. And then I like Rodgers because he was pushing the ball, in week one. He had the most fantasy points on throws 15 yards or further downfield. He led the league in passing yardage on those throws. 23.3 yards per attempt on those throws. Banged up secondary, another good spot. Maybe the Lions can also be a team that, like the Vikings did, can just kind of nudge the Packers to keep throwing a little bit still too. But I think he's a guy that where he's priced, he's a little bit more palpable on FanDuel than he is at DraftKings.
Yeah, I was talking in a previous pod about, can this Packers passing game continue to do what they did in week one the whole season? And
for quarterbacks, we don't want to. I think Lamar's the only other guy I would entertain paying up for this week.
Yeah.
Dak
too.
Yeah.
No, I see what you're saying. And, thinking about Rodgers in that passing game, can they do this the rest of the season? I don't know, but can they do this in week two against that banged-up Lions secondary that wasn't all that great to begin with? Absolutely. So mine, and I don't feel great about this, which is exactly how you want to start, a recommendation point, but it's Jimmy Garoppolo, and it's just because I think we kind of do this thing with Jimmy a lot where he has one underwhelming game. We kind of write him off as this average QB, but then he can come back and put up some really big efforts. Only Lamar Jackson had more games last season with at least 4 passing touchdowns. I think a lot of us thought Jimmy would have that type of performance in week one against the Cardinals. Didn't quite come to fruition, but now we're going to a much worse secondary in week two. Jets came in as PFF single worst secondary entering the season. I don't think they did much in week one to really prove that notion wrong. And this is just a weird situation where I think they might be so obsessed with stopping the run, it's going to force the 49ers to pass. And you're going to be able to form some cheap, just kind of contrarian stacks with him and some of these tight ends, particularly if George Kittle ends up being out. With Jordan Reed there, even Ross Dwelly sitting there at the min price, had to pull that name out of the hat this morning. Maybe even the running back. So, it's iffy. It's I understand, but he is lower on that price point. I think his price point relative to the guys around him is a little bit too low. So for that reason, in the matchup, I will have some exposure to Jimmy G, as ugly as it might sound out loud. All right, Rich, who you got running back?
I like everyone's favorite Twitter punching bag, Ronald Jones. It's real easy to just say, when you look at Carolina, and they've allowed multiple rushing touchdowns in 6 straight games dating back to last season. That's the longest streak for any team since the 1999-2000 Cleveland Browns. And they were, just picked up right where they left off last year, just getting smoked on the ground. And, Bruce Arians, at least true to his word for 1 week. It was really Ronald Jones' show. He played 47% of the offensive snaps, where LaShawn McCoy still had 36%, but he handled 17 of the 22, backfield rushing attempts. He had 73% of the backfield touches. That ranked 9th amongst all running backs in the league. Maybe we'll see Leonard Fournette's role grow as it goes on, and maybe he won't get the goal line carries. But anyone playing the Carolina Panthers, I'm going to dip my toes in the water for sure.
Yeah, that's an amazing stat. Anytime you're pulling something back from the 90s, man, you should feel proud about that. I'm looking at Kenyan Drake and a little bit of a play off of Jonathan Taylor, who's just going to be eating chalk at 5,700. And Drake's a little more expensive, but people seem kind of down on him after week one. And okay, it wasn't, one of his biggest performances. We saw him have the 4 touchdown game last year and everything, but it continued to largely be a one-back backfield. Drake played 69% of the snaps. He had 16 carries, 2 targets. The Cardinals are really, I think, running the pace they probably wanted to run all last season, just weren't quite efficient enough to probably do it. So I think we're going to see a ton of plays from this offense all season. So even though Chase Edmonds, 36% snaps, 6 carries, 5 targets, maybe a little more involved than Drake fantasy managers would have hoped for. But, it was a week where Kyler had 13 rush attempts himself. That's not going to happen every week. And I think we're going to see Drake, potentially push for 20-plus carries if they can get up on the scoreboard. And, all the credit in the world, the Washington football team defensive line. They got beasts everywhere there. But, going into the season and looking at last year, it was Lamar Jackson's Ravens and Kyler Murray's Cardinals as the 2 top offenses just in rushing efficiency almost across the board. So I think Drake Drake, we see he's the lead back, and better days will be on the horizon. Don't be afraid to chase. Again, slightly tough matchup, but I don't think we should be crowning Washington as a defense. We just need to fully fade quite yet. All right, Rich, why are you not afraid of T.Y. Hilton in week 2?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of what we hit on earlier, just, how bad both of those boundary corners struggled for the Vikings in week 1. Holton Hill, he allowed 7 for 87 and 1 in his coverage. Cameron Dantzler allowed 7 for, 80 yards and a touchdown in his coverage. And Hilton still was there. The targets are there. He caught 4 of 9 targets, but his 9 targets were there at the top of the team. He also led the team in depth of target, 12.2 yard depth per target. So, I mean, the only difference too is that, now with Paris Campbell, elevating, we don't see that like dual usage from Hilton. He was a guy that would like typically get in the slot for like 30 to 40% of his routes. And even last year, he was running like around 30%, 29, 30%. And he only ran 10% of his routes in the slot with them having an actual full-time slot receiver now. But that just opens up his ceiling a little bit more. So just basically just going back and saying people like, oh, he was a dud, but the targets are there. The target was there, and then the matchup is here indoors. And if you're going to go that is fine, but to build, there's ways to build around that game and do a lot of game stacking potential in that as well. With the receivers, I think Phillip Rivers is in a weird spot too. Like, the matchup is good. You can run it back with Kirk Cousins based on just how much zone the Colts played and how many easy completions they gave up to the Jaguars. Dalvin Cook, you've got Adam Thielen. There's a lot. That game's kind of sneaky fun, and it has some fun potential. I'm going right back though to Hilton though as a top 24 receiver this week.
Yeah, 2 seemingly run-first offenses with secondaries that can't guard anyone. So you would think that they'll maybe adjust that. But, yeah, that's sneaky shootout, and I don't really have a good grasp of that one yet. So I want to talk about Diontae Johnson for a second. I think the points you brought up are fair. I mean, we would like to see that ADOT increase. But to me, it was still – it turned out really well because I was getting some, like, Dante Moncrief vibes for a little bit. It looked bad, man. I mean, he had a brutal drop in the third quarter where it was just like, oh, man, what's going on here? We're gonna see him at the bench. But the very next play, Rossberger went back to him in tight coverage. Diontae came down with it. Seemed like that really kind of, took some pressure off his shoulders. And for the rest of the way, they were really connecting throughout the game. And going into week 2, it's like, okay, we now know we have the snaps. Juju and Diontae are the offense's top 2 receivers, and Washington and Claypool are rotating. It's what we thought would happen, but it's good to have that, certification. So knowing that, I'm ready to fire up Diontae Johnson as a top 30 receiver on a weekly basis, particularly in this spot. I mean, Denver, not a bad defense, but you take away Von Miller, and now AJ WR1 is on IR. Like, he's going to be going up against, a very middling cornerback group. Bryce Callahan's probably the strongest one, but he's going to be in the slot, spending most of his time with Juju if there's not some linebacker or safety doing that. But, yeah, man, so I think we just got to get used to Diontae Johnson being at least a viable, wide receiver 3 more weeks than not. I don't think we're going to quite see 2018, Big Ben, 5,000 yards version of the Steelers offense, but I think it's definitely good enough to enable potentially 2 wide receiver 2s throughout the season. All right, we're going to end things on tight end. Rich, why are you not giving up on Hayden Hurst yet?
Well, early in the season, and go circle back to those guys because we see this every year. Someone's hot on a guy or someone's chalky and then they flame, and then everyone's like they just run for the hills, and then the next week you can come back and typically scoop up some leverage on those guys because hey man, not everyone's good every week. But I think Hayden Hurst was one of those things where you were looking at team stats and people looked at stuff in the situation. He got a lot of buzz all off season, and Seattle was bad against tight ends last year. But I mean, listen, man, Jamal Adams gave up 0 yards and 45 coverage snaps. He was targeted just 2 times. He made a difference. He had a sack. That guy was everywhere in that game, despite that game being a little more shootout potential. And then it just, like I said, it turned over that where it made more sense for Russell Gage to be involved. But if you look at Hayden Hurst ran the most routes of all tight ends in the NFL. He ran a route on 81% of Atlanta's dropbacks. Those are guys we want. When guys down the field, we want our tight ends running routes. We want them in, high passing offenses. That's what we've got here. And then, that Cowboys, they lose Leighton Vander Esch. They lose Sean Lee. So, I mean, it's just a spot where I think Atlanta's going to drop back and throw a lot, and he's going to be running routes, and everyone was mad that he didn't deliver for them in week 1. So I'm going to go back and try to get leverage on those people that were disappointed in week 2.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick. And we know Ridley and Julio are going to be the top two there, but it could definitely go back and forth between Hurst and Russell Gage throughout the season. I am liking me some Jordan Akins, man. I know everyone's been, buying Logan Thomas this week, but I think Akins is the guy that actually, if you really need help at the tight end position, don't be afraid to scoop him up. We talk about tight ends out on the field. Jordan Akins played more snaps than any Texans wide receiver in that Thursday night game last week, and he looked good doing so. He's always looked good. It's just been a problem of Akins and Darren Fells were splitting snaps and targets almost like down the middle last year. Akins has always been the one more, able to stretch the field. Fells, we kind of joke about the 2-3 catches for 13 yards and 2 touchdowns type stat lines because he only kind of gets those, catch and fall type passes. But Akins legit has talent, and the way they were using him with 24 of his 48 offensive snaps were in the slot. So he's more or less a receiver, and it's the Deshaun Watson offense. Matchup isn't good. I get it versus the Ravens, but it might put him in comeback mode. And, even though I'm not hyping up Watson as a top 5 QB this week, he is one of the best dudes in the league at racking up yards when it does get to garbage time. So I think Jordan Akins is someone we're going to have to wrap our mind around, having a pretty big role this year, and I think he could get some good production with it. All right, man, that's going to do it. We've got through a lot of dudes here. Thank you again for coming on. Enjoy talking to you. Do you have any stuff on the pipeline you want to pitch, start off for the loyal listeners out there?
Now you can just find all my work at sharpfootballanalysis.com. I also have a podcast. It's called Pre-Snap Motion. You guys can check that out every week. But other than that, I'm just glad that football's here and we've got some normalcy back in our lives.
So great, man. Everyone follow Rich on Twitter at Lord Reeves. Awesome stuff, man. And thank you all for listening. I'm Ian Hartitz. This has been the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. And until next time, take care, everyone.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel. And if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.